All right, so I'm going to create a directory just called cores and JWT. Okay, so I think the first thing that we can do is we're going to create just a new front-end application. I'm going to use Ember for this, but just your knowledge from Laravel, it'll feel familiar because it's very it's kind of like Laravel where it comes pre-built in with a lot of things, and it's like a full framework. So to install Ember, you can say npm install -g ember-cli. So if you run that command, it'll install this Ember command where we can use it to scaffold out a new project. React is pretty similar. They have one called like Create React App, so it's just another CLI to like scaffold out projects. I already have it installed, so I'm not going to install it again. So that'll take a minute. And if you get errors, you might have to prefix it with sudo npm install. So once you do that, you can run this command called ember new, and this will just create the project. So I'll say ember new, and I'll call this, we'll just call this front end. So this will create a directory called front end, install a bunch of things. Yes?
What was the command that you just read?
Oh, yeah, I'll type it out in the Slack. Or class demos, I'll say npm install -g ember-cli.
And then Ember new.
Yes. Oh, right. Okay, so I can see I have this front end folder, and I'll go ahead and open this up. So my Atom got corrupted. I couldn't. I spent a few hours trying to fix it, so I just switched to VS Code. I don't know what happened, so I'm using this for now. It's been about 2 weeks, and it's been fine.
Maybe that's good.
So far, it's actually pretty good. Yeah.
You can't terminal from inside of it.
Yeah. The reason actually I tried it like a while ago, and then like the terminal would cause my computer to fan, so I was like, nah, I don't like this. So then I gave up. But so far, I think it's gotten better. So I'll keep using it.
Question.
Yeah.
I'm here to gloat, that's all.
I know everyone was talking about it. I was like, no, I was holding out. Yeah, it was. I don't know what happened. It got corrupted, and I went on forum. I was like, oh, my Atom's broken. All right. Okay, so from the terminal, I can run ember s or ember serve, and this will just kind of like run the application. You can see that it generated a bunch of files, so it's not like here's an index HTML file and double click on it and you can open it up in the browser. It comes with a server and it has like a compiler and it does all this stuff because like you end up separating out all your files just like in Laravel, but then in order to ship it down to the browser, they combine them and minify them so that it's performant. So yeah, there's all this like extra stuff that just comes with all these different frameworks. So we can run it, and then we can visit this localhost :4200. Okay, so we have this app running. So now I'm just going to open up another tab, and we're going to have the API also running. So if you go to the week 15, I just put the starter project here. Let's just clone this so we all clone the same thing. So this is like a previous week. I just copied it and duplicated it. So you can either go to clone or download and then just download that. So I'm going to make sure you CD out of the front end folder. So just go up one. And so if you ls, you should see front end. So now I'm going to say git clone that, and I'm going to clone it as backend. So we have two folders, front end, back end. So git clone, the URL, space, backend. This will just kind of name that folder backend. So at this point, you can see ls and backend and front end. So the next thing we have to do is cd into that backend folder and run npm install, because we have to install like Express and all that stuff. So cd in there, run npm install. And at this point, you should be able to run nodemon app.js. Yes?
So we closed the link to the starter project, right?
Yep.
Okay. Because it says right now it's called JWT starter. Did you rename it to backend?
Oh yeah. If you
rename it.
yeah. See if you this was the command I ran. So if you say git clone URL space backend, that'll like rename the folder like in one thing. But yeah, you could just manually rename it too.
What did you do after that? Did you download something?
I cd'd into the backend folder and ran npm install. And then the last thing I did was nodemon app.js. So hopefully at this point you can go to localhost 8000/API/playlists and see a bunch of playlists being returned. So we have two apps here. They're on different ports. One's 4200, the other's 8000, which makes them technically different domains. So we can simulate kind of this core stuff. Okay, so if we go inside the Ember project, like this is going to be kind of a slight rush through Ember. I teach it in ITV 404 in the fall, so if you want to learn more about it, we'll go into it in that class. But if you go inside the app templates folder and then application, you're going to see like this welcome page tag. If you just delete this, this will give you like the blank white page, and it'll just auto reload behind the scenes. And then go ahead and open up the Chrome console. If you right click and say inspect, okay, so one other configuration that's really handy is if you go inside Chrome and click on these three dots right here, there's a settings option. So three dots, settings. And the things that I usually always check are this, under console, there's this one that says log XML HTTP requests. So make sure that's clicked. And what that means is XML HTTP request is the class name used to make these AJAX requests. And so people call them either AJAX requests, AJAX calls, XML HTTP requests. Sometimes they'll say XHR. All three of those generally mean the same thing. Also, another one I usually do is disable cache while DevTools is open. I don't know if that's automatically checked when you open it, but this way, you know, when you're reloading things, assets like CSS, JavaScript aren't cached. So, yeah, I usually do that. It's not really specific to today, but it's just like handy when you're developing things, and especially, you know, if you're sometimes you have to go like old school and just drag and drop files to an FTP server and try it and stuff, and it's just, you know, it's nice when it's just the cache is cleared every single time. Okay, so if you kind of go back to the tab that's running Ember Serve and hit Command T, you can open up just another tab and this will be in the front end directory. So I generally will have one that runs this Ember Serve and then one that runs the commands. So kind of like with Laravel when we said PHP artisan make controller model, all those things, Ember has one too, to kind of create these files. So we're going to run a command that's ember g, or generate, ember g for short, ember generate route, and we're going to create a route called playlist. And so a route is like a new URL inside of our front end app. And so we can, in our browser, we can navigate to /playlist. And the page is empty just because we haven't done anything, but we did get that route. If I were to kind of change it to something not playlist, like, you know, throw in some extra characters, you'll see an error in the bottom because that URL doesn't actually exist. So you can see that that generate route did kind of do something. So what we're going to do is we're going to have like this URL or this page. It's going to make an AJAX request to this API playlist endpoint. They don't have to be called the same thing, but I just called the URL playlist in the Ember app just because it kind of makes sense, right? If I'm going to show a list of playlists, the URL makes sense to call it playlist. Okay, so inside the app, you'll see this folder called routes and then playlists. Make this a little bit bigger. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to import jQuery. So jQuery kind of already comes included with Ember, so we can run this statement. These import statements, these are like kind of like when we learned those common JS ones in Node where we say require and then the package name, or require and the file name. This is like the newer way of doing it. You can actually do those in Node too, but there's this like divide between the Node ecosystem and like the general JavaScript community for front end. And so these are called like ES6 imports, and the other ones are called common JS. It's kind of crazy, but just think of it as another way of pulling in another package. But I need to pull in jQuery. And so the first thing that kind of gets run is this function called model. So I can say $.ajax. So this is jQuery. And I'm going to say method is get. Whoa. And then URL is, I'm going to copy this out. So we're making this AJAX request to localhost 8000 API playlist. We're going to fetch that data, and then we can do something with it. Yes?
Which directory is playlist?
It's inside the routes folder. Oh yeah, so app and then routes. Now, normally I actually wouldn't hard code the URL like this because when I ship it off to like, an actual server, there is no localhost 8000. So in Ember, there's like an environment file where you can say like in production environment, use this URL, and in development mode, use this other URL. It gets into more Ember stuff, which I'm gonna obviously leave out because we only have so much time today. But so this kind of gets the job done. But yeah, just a side note. Okay, so we made this AJAX request from this playlist route. So if I were to go back to the front end, you can see we're getting this error. And it says access to XML HTTP request, that URL from origin 4200 has been blocked by CORS. By the CORS policy, no access control allow origin. So this is that same origin policy. So that thing saying you can't make AJAX requests to other domains. So without some extra configuration. So how do we get this all fixed? Okay, so I'm going to leave this running. And now I'm also going to open the backend project. So let's see. I'm going to open up backend. And I'll open up the app.js file. So there's a package that essentially does all the core stuff. So CORS is actually a piece of middleware that we can add to our API. So kind of like this body parser JSON, which is a piece of middleware to parse a request body. We can also add this CORS middleware to check the headers and say, what domain is the request coming from, and if it's coming from 4200. We'll go ahead and say, okay, we'll allow this request. So it works, just a lot like the middleware that we did in Laravel, except for that. Let's see. I think in Laravel, I guess we didn't do the CORS middleware. We did the middleware for like authentication. Yeah. So here we're gonna create middleware, but for CORS. Okay. So without having to write middleware, there's a package built for like Express middleware, and we can easily just plug that in. So if we go to our command line, I'm just gonna stop the server for a minute, so the backend one, and I'm gonna say npm install CORS -- save. So this will install CORS and write it to that package JSON file. And then I'll just restart NodeMon. So restart the server. I'll paste that command in this Slack too. Okay, so I installed CORS. Now I just have to consume the middleware. So if we go back to our file, I'm going to say CORS is equal to require CORS. So we're just going to pull it in. And then right underneath the body parser stuff, I'm just going to add it here. So I'm going to say app.use CORS. And so right now, this will just kind of enable all requests to go through. If we're to, I put a link to the CORS. Let's see here. Let's see, CORS. Yeah, if you click on the link Express Cores Middleware, you can read more about it. And this is actually on the official doc. So by default, this will just let all requests go through, but you can actually configure it to say only certain origins. You can even do things like certain methods. So get, if you only want to do like gets or puts or posts or what, like, you can configure all that. In this case, I think we'll just kind of let everything hit it. So just keep it open. All right, so if we go back to our front end and refresh the page, then you'll see XHR finished loading. It made the request. You don't see any errors. You can kind of click into this, and you can see here's the data. So our front end app made the request successfully.
Sorry, where did you see the data?
Oh,
Or did it double come?
yeah, if you refresh the page, you can just click on this link here. And this will kind of take you to the network panel. And under XHR right here, this tab, if you click on this and then go to preview, you'll see all the data here.
Was that initial link, was that just an element? Oh, console.
Oh, console, yeah. Yeah.
Oh,
And you can even look at things like, so you can actually see the entire response. So this was the response, but the preview tab is kind of nice because this will like format it and make it interactive, so you can kind of drill down and stuff. So you can kind of expand and collapse all this. If you look at headers, here's that access control allow origin star. It's saying anything. Now there's some APIs that are open. Like if you the Reddit API is actually completely open. You can make AJAX requests to it. They don't, at least for gets. I'm pretty sure it's only gets. But yeah, it's a nice API because you can just read content, just making AJAX calls to it without having to do like any extra stuff. But I would say, I mean, a good chunk of APIs are not.
You have the playlist JS file on the front end?
Any questions? All right, let's add a little bit more to the front end to make this a little bit better experience, and then we're going to add in authentication. So what we're going to do is, okay, so that's really all there is to Core. You just enable it, and boom, you're good to go. So the next piece is we're going to create two links here. So one's going to be login, and one's going to be playlist. And imagine we want to add some like authentication to this API. How would we do that? And so kind of before I get into that, let's just set up the front end first, and then we'll get into that. Okay, so there's also another file called playlist.hbs. It's inside the templates folder. Let me collapse that. So if you so when we did that like Ember generate route playlist, we created a file called playlist.js in the routes folder, and then a template called playlist.hbs. So this template gets rendered from once this route finishes loading. So this model right here, we can take the data that's returned from here from this AJAX call and render it. So this gets into like specific, so HBS also stands for handlebar. So handlebars is like a templating language. It looks a lot like the Blade syntax. So we can say each model as playlist. So it's kind of like a for each loop, but inside this handlebars templating language. And I'll just put this inside an LI. So maybe I'll also add an unordered list kind of around it to make this list complete. And let's see, the playlist, it's, okay, we'll just show the name. So we can say in curly playlist.name. So it should look kind of familiar to Blade templating. I'd say like almost every templating engine uses these like double curlies, so.
/each and then
Oh yeah, pound each and then slash each. And if we go to our front end, we can just see the list of playlists. Okay, so when we hit the playlist route, it renders the playlist template. So it fetches this data. We get this model variable inside the template. You can render it. There's also this application HPS, which had that welcome page stuff that we deleted. This is like the equivalent of Blade layout. So we created that layout file, right, which was like the shell of it, where you can put like the document head and common things. So this is kind of like that, where we can put common things. So one thing that we might want to put is a navigation, right? So let's put a link to the playlist page. So you can use this special link to tag, and you can say, I want to link to playlist, and we'll give it the name playlist, and then we'll close the link to. And so this will essentially create like an anchor tag behind the scene that routes directly to playlists. And I'll kind of explain a little bit more about what's going behind the scenes once I create a couple more links. Now the outlet is the place where it's kind of like the in Blade when we had it was like yield, right, and we did content or something, right? It's essentially the same thing. It's like the placeholder for like the playlist template will get rendered right there. Okay, so let's go back to our terminal tab for the Ember thing, and we're going to create two more routes. So we're going to say Ember generate route. We'll call this maybe the about page. We're only going to put some static stuff there. And then we'll also say Ember generate route login. So these two, Ember generate route about and Ember generate route login. Now if we go back to our application template, let's just copy this and we're going to add these same links here. So I'm going to have one for about. And I'll put some text in there, so about. And I'll do the same for login. Okay, so we have 3 routes, which means 3 pages, and each of these link tos will kind of link directly to each one. So why the link to as opposed to like a plain anchor tag? So if we kind of inspect this app right here, you can see that as we click on links, there's actually no page refresh happening. And so this is kind of like the nature of single page applications where you can change the content on the page and change the URL, but without having to make a full page refresh. And so Gmail is like a good example of a single page app. Same thing with Google Maps. LinkedIn is also a single page app. LinkedIn's actually written in Ember too. It's like a giant Ember app. But
React is similar to this.
yeah, same thing. You can kind of do the same stuff. Yeah.
Which was preferable for React in Ember?
React's definitely more popular. I mean, they're kind of, I'd say they're slightly different because React is more like just components, right? You have these things called components for doing like, well, you can think of a component as like your custom HTML tag with maybe your own JavaScript behind it. So you could add React to like a page, a server rendered page, maybe built with Laravel. Or you can go this full like single page route, right? Which is like, has its own like server and you can do that. So you can do both with that. Ember's more leans towards just the single page app approach. So, so like it kind of depends, right?
So
if you
within the realm of single page apps.
do what?
So within the realm of single page apps, we move into the server rendered page.
Yeah, in the realm of single page apps, like with React, you'll probably have to do a little bit more configuration. You're gonna have to add like in the tooling and like the equivalent of with it, like Eloquent, right? We have Eloquent in Laravel. Ember has its own like version of Eloquent, but for the front end for dealing with APIs. React also has its own thing. I would say like in short, Ember's like the batteries included approach. You get everything out of the box, boom, you're ready to go. Kind of like you can see right here. In React, you'd probably have to configure a few more things to get it to be the single page app. So some people like the configuration, some people don't. Yeah. Yes.
Does like a single page app take longer to load because everything's just on one page?
Maybe initially, I guess there's like all these things you can do to make it fast too, though. So, but I would say it's significantly more complex than like a server rendered app. Like if I were to create an app right now and I had a bunch of forms, I could whip it out pretty fast in Laravel just because of all the stuff. But if I had to do it, write the API and write the front end, hook them up together, deploy the two, like there's a lot more complexity there, and it takes longer. So it depends. I guess it depends how bad I want like a single page app. But yeah. Yeah, some people go like the hybrid approach where they do like the Laravel thing and sprinkle in a good amount of JavaScript in there so that you get like the quick interactivity as people are like clicking on things, but between certain pages you might have a full page reload. Also, another thing that makes single page apps like more complex is everything's in memory. So you can imagine like Gmail, right? I have Gmail open all day and I actually like rarely turn it. I never like close it, right? It's just something I leave on and I open my computer, boom, it's working again. But like to get all that working, like there's a lot of complexity there as opposed to just boom, server reload, and then like you start at a fresh state. Whereas with like single page apps, like you have variables accumulating, data accumulating, and all this state that's like harder to manage as opposed to just like getting a fresh state from the server and just control reload. But like in terms of jobs and everything, I'd say a lot. I mean, both are pretty popular, but like it's you are seeing a lot of like the push towards single page apps. Okay, so yeah, so we have like a single page app here, right? You can change the URL, you can click around, there's no full page reload. As I click on playlist, you can see like I am making the XHR request to get all the data. So every time I click it, you can see like this counter go up. So. Okay, so let's go to the login page now. We're just gonna add like a quick form. So we're gonna go to the login template, HBS. And I'll add just kind of a form tag. And then I'll add an input. Well, okay. So you got to use like these special input helpers, but we're going to say input value is equal to email. And then we're going to say button login. I'm going to skip out on the password, but just imagine like, there could be a password here too. or even for the sake of completeness, I guess we could throw it in. We could say input type is equal to password, and then the value is password. So what this kind of does is it creates an input behind the scenes, and every time I type into this input, it binds that value to a variable called email or a variable called password, so I can access it before I send it off to the server. You can imagine just with like plain JavaScript, I would have to like set up these event listeners, read the value. You could say like, you know, query document dot get element or query selector input dot value. You can pull it out of the DOM and get that value that way. But frameworks just generally make it a little bit easier by like binding variables to inputs and stuff. Okay, so if I look at, right, you can see my form, I have a login, submit, it's just doing a page reload, but we're gonna intercept that in a minute. Okay, so the last thing that we're gonna do, so we're just like one more piece on the Ember side, and then we'll do the API side. Yeah.
Can you put your HTML in the
Oh, sure. Okay, so I'm gonna go back to the front end terminal tab. I'm gonna say Ember generate controller called login. And so, so we've seen two pieces. We saw the route and the template. The route is for like providing data to the template and dealing with the URL stuff. The controller is the thing that sort of backs the template. So if I want to say when I submit this form, run some function, that some function would be live in the controller. So you can think of it as for like dealing with user events and stuff. Okay, so it's inside this controller's login.js file. So we'll open that up. And then from our form, we're going to add this event listener. So we're going to say on submit equals curly curly action. And I'll create an action called login. So an action is like a function, or it's essentially a function that runs on some user event, like a submit or a click or a mouse over. Okay, so this action right here will live inside that controller that we just created. So this login.js file. So here I'm going to create this actions object and then a function called login.
How did you get login.js and controller? Did you...
Oh yeah, I'll paste this. Ember generate controller login.
Is it login attributes?
Yes.
So when you have action login there, is it looking for a file name or is it looking for a function name? I noticed that in the login controller,
Mm-hmm.
name the function login.
Yeah, so this right here between the quotes maps to this right here, and it has to be inside this object called actions.
Okay, and it also has to be inside a file named login.
Oh yeah, yeah. I could call this do login, and you could say do login. So the file name kind of maps to oh yeah, that's also like, so the route was called login, right? And so the route was called login, which means the template's also called login, which means the controller is also called login. So they follow that convention of just making all those file names the same, just different directories. But then the action name, like you can call this whatever you want, just like I called it do login, but I'd say login probably just is cleaner. Yeah. Yeah, Ember is very convention based, so you know, if something isn't working, it's probably because maybe not following the conventions. But so it is heavy on conventions, kind of like Ruby on Rails, which is also a very like convention-based framework. Okay, so this login function will receive an event object, and here I can say event.prevent default. So you saw that, like, if I actually, before I save, if I just hit the login, you can see it's doing a page reload, right? I want to intercept that because this is a single page app, so I don't want to do the page reload. So I'm going to say event.prevent default, and then I can say, let's do a console log of this.email and this.password. And so these values right here, you saw that, well, I should actually, these are sort of optional, but if you go back to the login template, you can say value is equal to this email, value is equal to this password, and in our controller, we can access those values too. In the template, it's sort of optional. You don't have to say this dot, but that's how we get access to it. So here, if I type in dtang@usc.edu and just type in some password and then submit, you can see that we got our values. Okay, so at this point, we're gonna make an AJAX call, and so we're gonna do type is we're gonna make a post request, and then the URL is gonna be http://localhost 8000/API/auth. And this will be a promise that we get back. And this will resolve with us a response. And then we'll do a console log on the response. Oh, and then also in this request, so we haven't actually created this endpoint, but we're going to do it right after this. So we're going to make a post request to this URL, and then we also need to send in across the data. So the data is, you have to turn it into a JSON string. So I'm going to call this function JSON stringify and then pass in the data. So I'm going to pass in maybe like the email. So I'll say this.email, and then the password, which is this.password. What's up? Oh, sure. Also, oh yeah, I should do import $ from jQuery. Yeah, this is the controller. Okay, so now back to the board. Okay, so we have the API here. And we got our browser. So we're going to make okay, so we have all these endpoints like in our API. So the way this is just generally auth works is like with a lot of these APIs is you make a request to your auth endpoint and you send across like maybe the email and password or like the username or something. And then you're going to get back this token. And so this token is going to be used for when you make subsequent requests to, for example, like playlists. Actually, I should probably, let's actually get rid of this. playlist or any of our other endpoints, and then this will give us back the response. So you got like playlists and genres and a bunch of other endpoints. So the key here is like we need to get back this token. And so this token right here, you could come up with like your own like token. It's kind of like this this long string of characters. You can come up with your own like tokens if you want and manage those. But there's a popular standard out there called JWT. It stands for JSON Web Token. Some people also call them JOTs. But you can get these. You can have your API produce a JSON Web Token, and we're going to do this through a library just because it makes it really easy. And then we'll take this and send it to these APIs. So if that token is valid, then it'll send the response. But if it's not, then you can reject it and make the API call fail. So one interesting thing about this is when you have an app that deals with this, so like in our Ember app, right? Once we make this, we want to kind of save this on the client side so that we have the single page app. We're going to the playlist route or the genres route, and we're doing all these things. So we need to save it somewhere in our browser so that we can make subsequent requests to this API. So a lot of times people will store this in a storage built into the browser called local storage. So it kind of gets preserved in like this browser data store. So even if you close your browser, you still have access to this local storage. Some people will do one called session storage, which basically, as long as the tab is open, you have access to this data inside session storage, but once you close it, it gets erased. So minor differences, but you can kind of pick between one of these. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to create this endpoint, send down this JWT token, store it in one of these two storage mechanisms in the browser, and then send it back and forth to the endpoints. Okay, so I'm going to go back to the backend project. Okay, so if you want to go to your terminal, and then we're going to install the JSON Web Token library. So we're going to say npm install JSON Web Token -- save. So that's the first one that we're going to install. Now we're also going to install, do you remember in Laravel what that file was called where we stored like configuration information? Well, I guess ones that stored like database, yeah, the env file. Yeah, so so we're going to do that in Node, but that doesn't obviously come out of the box with Express, so we need to add another package to do that as well. So you can kind of see it also like with this, as we're building up our Node API, like we have to grab all these little packages as opposed to like Laravel, it just here's everything, batteries included sort of approach. So I'm also going to say npm install .env -- save. And this will deal with that .env file. Yes?
Sorry, what happens if you just do npm install without the save? Like,
oh, it won't write it to the package.json file. So if you were to delete your node modules folder and then try and run your app and then like do npm install to install everything, it wouldn't include those. Yeah, you'd be missing packages. Oh, I mean, you could always like even if just rerun this command -- save and it'll just write it out to package.json. Okay, so JSON Web Token .env. Here, I'll put these also in the chat. Okay, so I'm also going to create that .env file. So I'll just say touch.env, which will just create the file, or you can manually create the file. Yep.
This is the side thing, but just when it comes to like Laravel commands we're using or even Node commands, just like npm install and stuff, they've just been like really fast. Like I guess compared to like the Ember we were just doing earlier. Like, when we did Ember serve,
Yeah.
it would be like 9 seconds or something, whereas like I feel like in Laravel
It was a lot faster. Yeah, I mean,
like page application stuff or like
no, it's because of in the Ember project. Okay, so it's like using the latest JavaScript. So if you notice in here, it's using like those import statements, right? And it's using kind of the latest JavaScript. But not every browser has all those JavaScript features enabled. So what they do is actually pretty much what all these frameworks do is you can write the latest and greatest JavaScript, so it's a great developer experience. But then they compile it down to JavaScript that runs in most browsers, and that process, and then it does a bunch of other things too. It does like linting to make sure like your formatting is good, and like minification of these assets. So when you ship it down to the browser, like the user has to download a really small file as opposed to a big file. So it does like all these extra things that you don't really have to experience in the Node world, right? Because in the Node world, you don't have to. Well, once you install like Node 11 or whatever the latest is, right? It already supports the latest JavaScript, so you don't have to do that like compilation, or you don't have to like minify all these files into like a really small file so that the browser can run it. So that's why it's just generally faster. And also, the bigger your project gets, like you start adding up more files to your front end, it does get a little bit slower just because it's doing all these things. And so, like even right now, I mean, last week or a couple weeks ago, I was trying to figure out, for a work project, like how can I tweak it a bit to make it a little bit faster here and there because there's a lot of things going on. But yeah.
This is kind of a random question, but when you use like the npm command, does it download the package from the internet or like the local Node.js stuff?
I think there's a cache on your computer where it does it, like checks to see if it's there first, otherwise reaches out to the internet, but I forget. Something like that. It does some tricky stuff behind the scenes to like try and make that as quick as possible. So there is like a section on your computer, I think, that caches a lot of it. So yeah. Okay, so I created that env file. So let's rerun the NodeMon app, or the API. Okay, so if we go to our API, one thing that you want to add to the git ignore is the .env file, right? Because we're going to put sensitive information in there, so we don't want to commit that to GitHub. So make sure you add this. That was already in there in like the Laravel repository, so you didn't have to add it. But given that we have to kind of build all this up ourselves in Node, you have to throw it in there yourself. Okay, so here's where our first endpoint is. So we're gonna set up that endpoint. So we called it like a post request, and I think we said auth, right? So /auth. So normally what I would do is I would check to see if the credentials match some, there was a record in the database, but I'm going to skip that part just because, we don't have all that set up. So I'm just going to sort of hard code this, but I think you'll get the idea. So I can say if the request.body.email equals, and I'll just say like, let's do this, david@usc.edu. There's like the authorization or the authentication check. Then we're going to create a token and then send down the token. So we're going to say let token is equal to something, and we'll fill that something in. and then we'll say response.json token. So we're going to create a token and send it down as a response. Now, as a side note, like as part of a new ES6 or JavaScript feature, if the key name is the same as the value name, you can actually just leave it off. So you can just say like this. So, you know, it's a little cleaner. It's less code. But so you can say something like that. So in the event that the login was not successful, then you can say response.status. 401 means unauthorized, which is generally used for if you can't, bad credentials. And then we will end the response. Okay, so let's create this token. So if we go back to the top, we're going to incorporate that JWT library. So we'll say JWT is equal to require JSON web token. And so we'll use this to create a token. So down here where we said token is equal to blank string, we'll say JWT dot, and then there's a function called sign. So the first parameter or argument to the sign method is an object that contains some information. So you can think of maybe giving some information about the user, like the name that you want to display on the page or something. In this case, I would normally pull this out from, like, once you authenticate, you could pull in the authenticated user and place that here, but I'll just hard code David for now. And then the second one is a private key. And so the way this, it's pretty interesting how this works is you can create a token and with some private key. And so when I send this down to the browser, it's going to be like this string that's like pretty jumbled up, like you couldn't read it or anything. But you could actually take a JWT library from the client side and partially decrypt this token. So you can imagine like this token, maybe it looks something like this, right? I mean, it's kind of long. But I could partially decrypt it so that I could say, okay, I can read the information that I passed into the first argument to sign. So I could read like the name. Because there's some information that a client would probably want to use. So I could do that. Now I can so in subsequent API requests from the browser to the API, I'm going to send that token across. Now I can, from here, I can verify if this is a valid JSON web token. So when you sign it, you kind of use this encrypted key, but then I can kind of read it back over here, and using that same secret key, which is this value right here that we passed into it, I could see, has this token been tampered with? Is it a valid token? And so this is what we can use to, so this is essentially how we sign tokens. So it kind of gets into like some cryptography stuff that, a little bit beyond me, but that's essentially how this works. Okay, so for this secret key, I'm not going to just hard code a string in here, and this is where I'm going to put it inside the .env file. So I'm going to create a constant here, and I'll call this like secret key is equal to, we'll just say QWERTY. You probably want something more secure, but now we'll go to the sign method and we'll say process .env secret key. So all of the variables that we put inside this .env file will get exposed on this process.env variable. So process inside Node is like window inside the browser. Window is like the global object. Process is like the global object inside Node. So env is for all the environment variables, and we created one called secret key.
Is that created by the .env?
Yeah. Now that's actually something that we have to, so by default, just having this file in here isn't gonna like do it. So we actually have to go to the top of our file and we have to say require .env and then call .config. So this will like read in those files into environment variables and set that up. So generally, you kind of want this statement at the top of the page just because like anything below it could potentially use environment variables. So it's like the first thing you probably want to do.
Sorry, so you said that line is what allows us to call .env stuff anyway, basically.
Yeah. So this line will read in that env file, and then this will make it so that I have access to secret key on process.env. Yeah. So I signed a token, passed in some, public user information, name, maybe a profile image, something like that, bio, and then I signed it with this secret key. Okay, so let's test out this endpoint and just like see what this token looks like. So I'm gonna open up Postman. A lot of tools here. It's like hopping between like 2 different projects and Postman, and there's a lot going on. Okay, so I called the endpoint auth, and for the body, I'm gonna put some JSON. So I said email, and I'll put david@usc.edu, and change it to JSON, so application JSON. And let's see what I get back when I send this request. So when I hit send, you can see I got back 200 OK. And here's the token. So you can see it's kind of, it's just like a long encrypted string. So if I were to, change my login, right? So this is obviously not my email that I hard coded. So if I hit send, you can see we get back 401 unauthorized. So it rejected it. So at least that part's working. So we'll go back, make this email correct again, and then hit send, and then copy out the token. Okay, so I said that with this token, you can like partially decrypt it and read out that information like David that I passed into the first argument of sign. So this right here. If we go to kind of the class site, I put a link to JSON JWT decoder. So if you click on this and you scroll down a bit, you can actually paste in the token here. And you can see here's name, David. And there's this other property, IAT, it's issued at. So when was this token issued? So it looks like it's a, it's like a, Unix timestamp. So this token is actually pretty important, right? You wouldn't want to share this to anybody. If somebody else got a hold of this, they could use this token to access your API on your behalf and do things. So also one interesting thing about this is, let's say I tamper with this, like I change one thing. Instead of this 8 at the end, I change it to like 9. Or let's see, let's try this one. So, oh, now I messed it up. So like if you tamper with the token, you will not be able to like. Well, actually, here, let me get to that in a little bit. Okay, so we have the part where we authenticate like the credentials and issue a token. Now let's protect all of our APIs so that they have to have a valid token associated with it when people make requests to it. So what concept or what thing would we use to protect routes? If you remember from like Laravel. Yeah, middleware. So we're going to write a piece of middleware to protect all of these routes that checks, hey, is there a valid token? If so, let the request go through. If not, we'll send like a 401 or something. All right, so what I'm going to do here, actually, maybe in my project, I'm going to create a new folder called middleware. I'm just kind of adding a little bit of organization. Like, you don't have to do this, but we'll say middleware, and then we're going to create a new file in this middleware called protect.js. Or maybe call it authenticated, or I don't know. Maybe there's a better name. So what we're going to do here is we're going to say module.exports is equal to a function. And do you remember from Laravel, like, what were the three things that the function in the middleware class received? You guys remember? So the first one was request. Yep, response, yeah. And then there was a third one. Remember that? It was called next. Kind of remember that? So it was, so you get access to the request, the response, and if you call next, you're saying let the request continue and go on, through to the route. But if you don't call next, you're kind of just saying stop it, and you can do something about it. Like you could say like just end the request. Maybe send like a 401 that says you're not authorized. Okay, so inside this file, I'm going to pull in the JWT. So I'll say that library. So require JSON web token. Okay, so the way this is going to work is when we make these requests from the browser, we're going to expect to send the token inside a header called authorization. So it's going to look kind of like this, where you say authorization, which is the header name, and then the token. So it's going to be a header called authorization, and then the value will be this key called like the word bearer space and then the actual token. There's different like forms of authentication. There's another one called basic, and this will like prompt a browser to actually pop up like a dialog box, and you can type in like a user name and password. So there's a few different like authorization types. So the one that's generally used to like send tokens is this one. You could in theory actually just send the token without this bearer keyword, but it's just sort of like non-standard. So So typically you'll see like bearer space and then the token. So we're going to expect this header in the request so that we can process it. If it's not there, we're going to fail it. Okay, so we're going to read off the header. So we can say let authorization header is equal to request dot header authorization. Yes.
We're going like a little back. Could you post your app.post off?
Sure. Okay, so this will be a string, and then we could just split on the string, and we could say, let's see, we'll say like the type and token is equal to authorization header dot split on that space. So we're gonna this space right here, we're gonna split it, which will give us an array which contains the type and the token. So that's kind of what this is. It's using oh, whoops. That should be here. We could actually turn this into like one single line and just copy this and move this here and just a little simpler. So pull off the header, split by the space. We have the type and the token. Any questions?
I have no idea that's exactly.
Oh, right. Sometimes I forget. Oh yeah. So this is called destructuring. So, okay. So let's see. I could say this, right? I could say thing.
Yeah, maybe you say thing one or thing.
Yeah. Let type is equal to for people that I think I went over it, but just in case you forgot. So I could say thing 0 and let token is equal to thing 1, right? So it just gives me an array with 2 pieces, but this is obviously like more verbose, so you could actually destructure it. What's called destructuring, and just say type, comma token. Yeah, super nice, like new JavaScript syntax. But that's also one of those newer syntax that's I don't maybe necessarily available in all browsers. So that's why in Ember you need like the compiler and all that jazz. Okay, so now that I have the token, I can say JWT.verify, and I can pass in the token. And I also need to pass in the private key. So I think what did I call it again? Secret key. So if this actually doesn't verify, it's going to throw an error. And that's why I use this try catch block, so it'll immediately jump to here. So if it doesn't throw an error, that means it verified the token's cool. Then I can just call next, which says let the request go through to my actual like playlist route. And then otherwise, I'll just say maybe response.status 401 JSON. I'll send like an error. And I'll just say like requests must provide an authorization header with a valid token. Or you don't have to put anything there, but so that's our middleware. Verify the token to make sure it's valid. This way, somebody can't just like, come up with any token and then, hit our endpoints. It has to be a token that we issued through this auth endpoint. So the key here is like you need this secret key variable, which in order to sign the token and to verify that token. Any questions? Yes.
So say a user gets like an authorized token. Does that mean the token is equal to the secret key?
No, it's that the token was that kind of like long string, remember? So like, yeah, it was like this thing, but it was created by that secret key.
Okay.
Yeah. So if I were to like tamper with this and then send it, the verify would error and throw an error, and then we would see like a 401 because it was tampered with.
So with this setup, could you have multiple people? Can you already have multiple people with multiple keys or tokens?
Yeah, you could do that. I'm sure it gets more complex for like when you have like multiple users and stuff. This is just like a.
But you would need more secret keys.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm sure some places have more than one secret key.
Yeah.
For probably good reasons, but. Now, like what you could do is, imagine you have an app and maybe a tokens got compromised, right? So users were using an app or certain tokens got compromised. You could change the secret key and previous tokens no longer are valid anymore. So they would have to get a new token. And also like with these tokens, they don't have an expiration, but through this JSON web token, you can actually, there's another option in there to say like, it has an expiration on it. So yeah, there's a lot of actually configurations you can do with these JWT tokens. Okay, so the last thing is if we go to our app.js file, now let's make sure that we use this middleware. So I'm going to say app.use, and I want to use that protect middleware. So the protect function right here, I haven't included it in this file, so let's move this to the top. I'll just say, kind of put it right here. I'll say const protect is equal to require /middleware/protect. So I'm pulling in protect. And there's a reason why I didn't put the middleware kind of where I put all the other middleware. So like JSON parser or body parser and cores I put here, but you notice that I put the middleware right here. So I don't want this protect middleware before my auth, right? Because I don't want to like authenticate before I even get a token in the first place. Like that one's open. But then all the routes underneath this, I want to use it. So like the order of this file does matter. So if I put this use protect here, any routes beneath it will require this authentication. So like this delete endpoint, post, basically every endpoint beneath this will require auth because I put the middleware here. Yes?
Can I stop using that middleware later?
What's up?
Like, can I stop using that middleware like later?
What do you mean?
Like, can I define a group of endpoints that I want to use it?
Yeah. If you wanted like endpoints that didn't use it, just put the endpoints above it. Yeah, but I think like later on in the file, maybe, but I'm not sure. Is that the question you were asking? Yeah. Okay. You can also like add this middleware per route, so I think you can pass it as like another argument to each one, but that gets a little like tedious, right? You have to go to every single one and add it. It's easy to mess up and forget, so it's, I don't know, one spot. It's kind of nice. All right, so that should be it to the API. So let's actually just test this out via Postman. So I've created a token. now if I open up a new endpoint, and let's do a GET request to localhost 8000 API/playlist, and we'll hit send. And so if I see, if we look at this, we get a 401. It says request must provide an authorization header with a valid token, which is what we expect. So cool. So it's failing. So now we'll go to headers, and let's add in authorization. So we'll pick authorization. The value is bearer, space, and then the token. And so now if I hit send, the API request went through. Yeah.
I got like an error like app.use protect is not defined.
Inside the app.js file, did you import it like this? Also, like all these relationships, I would probably extract them out elsewhere, but just not maybe in the main routes file, because like it gets kind of messy here. Like I'm trying to like read the middleware and just the routes, right? But then I also see like these relationship setups, so I'd probably just extract it out somewhere else. So. I mean, that's what I would do. I don't think there's like this is the way to do it inside Node, because Node's very much like grab your packages, like put it together yourself, right? There isn't really as much like convention, and I think there's like you can pull conventions from like other things that you've learned, like Laravel, right? That was had a lot of conventions. You can pull those ideas and leverage it, but it's not like this is the one way, this is the way you do it, which is, I don't know. At least when I'm doing Node, it doesn't feel very comfortable. I like those like this is the right way to do it.
Where are you using the protect?
Where?
Yeah.
Right here. So right above like the delete. So basically the only route above it was the post auth, because that one doesn't really need it, because that's the one that gives you the token in the first place.
Right. So everything below that
Would have to have the token. Yeah. Oh, yes.
So I just remember you specify that it, where the header had to come in the form bearer and then token.
Oh, inside the inside the middleware, I did a split on a space. So like this would actually probably be a little bit better if I did a check first to make sure the type said bear, but extra validation. Like I'd probably do something where it's like
Yeah, no, like right now and type can be anything.
it can be anything, but yeah, I'd probably say like if the type is not equal to bear, maybe I'll say like throw new error, invalid type or something. And so throwing the new error would kind of jump to this catch block. Yeah, something like that. Oh yeah, so for the API/playlist endpoint, I added the authorization, and then for the value is bearer space and then the actual token. So in my other tab, I just kind of copied the token and pasted it there. And so now if I do this, cool. And if since I just added that thing, if I change it, like I'll add bearer 5 and hit send. Okay, so it looks like it works. Yeah, so we got now. Okay, so we got the off part for the API piece. So the last piece is now hooking this up with Ember, which is, hitting this endpoint, getting the token, and using it in our client-side app. So right now, if we were to go to our Ember app and we go to login, like this doesn't do anything about, if we click on playlist, right now it's doing the 401 unauthorized, so it gives us an error. Okay, so now I'm going to close the Node app for a sec. So is everybody good at least on this piece? Or any questions on it? We can come back to it later, but just we're going to open up the front end piece now. All right, so I'll say open front end. Okay, so now if I go to login and I type in, I think it was David at usc.edu, and it doesn't really matter what I type in for the password. I hit login. Actually, what was the thing that I used? I gotta open it now. Let's see if David email. Okay, so like Chrome DevTools is really nice just so you can kind of like inspect this request. And let's see. So I got the cores. Oh, let's see. Oh, it's API auth. Get rid of this because I forgot to add that in the APIs. I just changed that to just /auth. I probably should change the other one, but.
Is there any reason why actually to compare in the key why it still would reject? Still would it
Like what you could do actually is, if you go back to your protect middleware, like for debugging purposes, you could say response.json error and just like whatever the error was caught, like just throw that to the page, and then it might give you a little bit more insight as to, what's going on. That's how I'd probably go about debugging it. Because this error, it'll contain like whatever was thrown by this verify thing, so it'll kind of give some reason as to why. Here, I'll also put the protect JS in the Slack. Nope, not the token.
You need the bearer to put the token.
Let's see. Oh, I did authorization and then bear space and then the token, so no quotes or anything. Yeah. Okay, so back to the front end. So just change the URL because I had that mismatched. So let's try this again. So I'll type in David at usc.edu. Login. Okay, so I'm still getting an error. Ah, that's right. Okay. The content type. Okay. One other thing we have to add to this request is we have to say content, or I think it's headers, object. There's another one for content type. And you want this to say application/JSON. I think that's it. It was trying to, I think, send it as like form data. Let me make sure this works before I say this is it. Okay, so David at usc.edu. Okay, so it looks good. We see it logged from the console. You can see the post request, it was 200. If we preview the response, you can see here's the token. So yeah, just add this piece. So if we actually look at like what we just did, you can see under request headers, content type application /JSON. So I'm saying that the content that I'm sending is JSON as opposed to like form data. Okay, so now that I get back a response, and you can see like in our front end app, we did a console log on response, but we can do, and here's it's an object with a property called token. So now we could actually just store this inside local storage. I could say local storage dot token is equal to response dot token. And I'll get rid of the console log. And so once we put it inside local storage, what we can do is go to our playlist route. So here, and we're going to add in this header. So I'll say headers. I'll say authorization is equal to bearer space local storage dot token. So I'm using the backtick so you can use like the string interpolation where you can like throw variables inside a string, kind of like the double quotes in PHP. But now we'll send off this this token in the authorization header so that hopefully this page will work. Yes?
Could you go to the login.js?
Yes, we're using this headers property to set the content type when we log in to get that token initially. And then with the playlist, we're also using headers, but this time we're sending that authorization header that the API expects. So now, at this point, okay, so where do you see even local storage? So local storage is under application, and here it is, so token. You can see it right here. So if I click on playlist right now, okay, so we did a get request to playlist. Now let's check this out. Okay, we're sending the token. Oh wait, I think it might be the same issue, the content type thing. All right, let's throw this here. Except for I'm not really sending anything, so. Let's see. All right, let me delete that. Go to login. So say david@usc.edu. All right, so we should have a token there. So if we click on playlists, okay, maybe I stored something like that inside local storage, but okay. So now it looks like, you know, we made this get request to playlist. you can see that authorization, we sent the token through that bearer space token, and we got the data back. And if we were to go back and kind of delete this token, so go to application and just delete the token from local storage and refresh, you'll see that blank page, so there was some kind of error. There's one really nice thing, like, well, actually, here, before I get into that, any questions? So with like these templates, you can actually create a new template in Ember just called error.hbs, and just say like h1 and it'll automatically render if the API call fails for that like plate. So like if this thing right here returns a promise that rejects, so it failed, like, you know, basically not 200, it'll automatically render this error template, which is really nice. So like you can get to, I don't have to think about like, you know, rendering these things. It just does it. So it's another one of those like conventions, but, you know, it says, cool. But I go to login, then I go to, you know, david@usc.edu, type in something for the password. I'm logged in. I go to playlists. I see it. Now you probably want to do other things too, like, you know, conditionally show like log in, log out, and all that kind of stuff. But that's, you know, gets into way more things. Yeah. Yes.
What did you do earlier to like fix that blank screen error?
Oh, I just created the, like when there was an error instead of
Yeah.
So like, so if I go in here and delete token and then go to playlist, or I'll just reload it, right? Like this thing, and it was blank. Yeah, all I did was create this file called error.hbs inside the templates folder. So you can see it's just right here, and then like Ember just automatically renders this as like a convention.
Oh.
Okay, so hopefully you kind of just saw like what's involved to get like a front end app, whether it's Ember, React, Vue, Angular. Like there's all these front end frameworks that, you know, people are using to build these like rich client side applications. How does it communicate with an API that you learned how to build in this class? So we saw cores, right, to make these cross domain AJAX requests, which is important. And if you want to do authentication, people generally go with like this JWT thing. You can also get into like more complex ways through like OAuth 2, and OAuth 2 is like, I mean, it's a lot more complicated. And even like, I feel like anybody, you ask anybody, nobody really understands like all of OAuth. It's that complicated. And so I've read about it for like multiple years, and there's pieces I get, but it's kind of complicated. But it does leverage, usually it leverages JWTs. For like the token, because it does involve tokens. Let's see. Yeah, so I put some of the links are on the class for this week. There's an interesting Stack Overflow answer for like why is the bearer required before the token in the authorization header. If you want to read about it, you don't have to put it, but it's just more of a like sort of like a standard, so you can kind of read information about that. And any questions on like this stuff today? Okay, so the only homework, and this is the last assignment, is Lab 7. So it's just next week we're going to have 3 guests. So one's a manager for like a backend team, one's a DevOps engineer, and then Mikal, which you met last week since she's a backend engineer. And we'll just do like a panel where I'll ask them questions and kind of things that you'll probably be interested in. But for the lab, just create a Google Doc that's publicly visible for us to see, and just come up with like 5 questions that you would want to ask. Now, I actually like think about it, like not just like general like questions that you pull from the internet. So like hopefully you just come up with like some questions that you're curious about, because they have a lot of experience, and I think you'd find it valuable if you're, even if you're entering just not even just the backend space, but like full stack dev or front end dev, they'll have some perspectives, especially like maybe from a hiring manager. Like what do they look for in resumes and questions, and some people ask like the more like computer science stuff. Some people don't. Kind of changes between like enterprise or like larger companies versus startups. So you can get some good advice from them.
So you said one of them is a backend manager?
Yeah. One's manager, engineering manager. I think he's for a backend team, and then the other one's for DevOps. So DevOps is also something like I never really talk about. One, I don't really know that much about it except for like some of the acronyms that surround it. But it's like things like we use Heroku to deploy our app, right? Which is really nice because it's like there's this platform, things are installed, I have these config files that I can like tweak a little bit and get the thing running, right? It generally works for a lot of applications, but sometimes like I guess when your site gets larger, it requires more infrastructure, and that's when it gets into things like AWS and like containerization through Docker, and there's like all these other tools that just like server stuff. How do you manage all that? And that's like the DevOps realm. So you can ask about that. I don't, mostly because, well, I mean, I'm mostly working on like an Ember app all day, and I just kind of install Node on my machine, and it just kind of works, right? Because it's like my runtime is the browser, so it's as long as it works in the browser, it's generally fine. I don't have to like, I'd say Docker is more of like maybe a backend thing, right? Because you need to install Node or MySQL and PHP and Apache or Nginx. Like there's all these things that you have to, and getting that right on every developer's machine is tough. Like even if it's just like one technology, right? Like Node's actually pretty easy to install, but once you start adding things like and Redis and MySQL and like all these databases, it's like how do you get all like that's like 10 things, right? You have to install. So people, get Docker. You don't have to install anything. You just have to install Docker and then run like Docker compose run or something, and then this like spins up the entire thing. So it's like really nice. But you also have to set up Docker too, which is another thing too. So personally, I mean, I think in the front end you probably won't use it that much, but back end likely.
Are all the people who are there all from
Actually, I'm not sure. I forgot to ask that. I'll find that out. Cool. So, final project. So, get started.
You've got a week and actually like 10 days for updates.
So April 28th, like hard.
How hard of a day is it?
Multiple.
I mean, before I used to say just hold on a sec. What's 428?
It's a Sunday. It's a Sunday. That's kind
It's
of.
during study days.
I mean, during study days, I mean, like.
Yeah. See, I used to make it like on the last day of class, which would be Tuesday the 23rd, so basically a week from today. But then I was like, every semester I was like, I'm always extending this thing, so I just make it the Sunday. I can't really do much longer than that though, because I gotta grade them all.
What's not much longer?
Give us
Tuesday.
Give us some study days to have with this app.
I will say, I mean, if you extend it to Wednesday,
then it is legal.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
let's do that.
Study, like,
Yeah,
actually,
if
Oh, is
it's
yeah.
that the exam?
So
Yeah.
you will
Yeah.
all the
Oh,
power.
the exam would've
All you
saved.
have to do is just press a couple keys.
But yeah, you're kind of free to do what you want as long as it is not exactly that like anything else is fine.
Like, the study days
Just like,
are pretty strict. Yeah, like.
if you can meet us in the middle and say,
All right, I'll say this. I guess like Wednesday, which would be 5/1.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's fine. And if you turn it in by the 28th, I'll probably be a little bit more lenient.
Yeah, if you turn it in early, you get the considerate going through the code carefully.
Wait, say that again?
yeah, how much more? Like, what if like after the 28th or before the 28th?
Well, I think as I grade it, I get crankier and crankier. Linearly.
It is very different encountering a mistake the first time than it is encountering the 10th time.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, essentially, I actually have to find on the seat of my pants for the other side.